Libby Fischer Hellmann or Libby Hellman, whatever you want. Just don't call me late for dinner. I am an author now. I wasn't always. And I have written, I'm on my 17th or 18th novel. I don't remember which. And I guess it depends if you count novellas as novels or you count novellas as short stories. If you count them as short stories, I've written about 28 short stories. If you count them as novels, I've written 25. So that's kind of the way that goes. Okay, let me see. My father died in 1996. And after the funeral, it was February 1996. And after the funeral, I came back from Washington, D.C., which is where I grew up and where they lived, and went down into the basement, and 4 months later emerged with my first novel, which was the worst piece of whatever you have ever seen. But I didn't know that. Hey, I finished a novel. I was hot stuff, Funny, it never got published. It's a very good question. And it's not quite as simple as it sounds, because when I was traditionally published for most of those 17 or 18 novels, and I have been self-published for the past 7 novels. So when I was traditionally published, I was clearly working for a publisher, even though I wrote the damn thing. And even though I had the rights to it, I contracted the rights, I licensed the rights to the publisher. So the publisher could do whatever they wanted with it. And I mean, they could throw it in the trash if they didn't like it. So I really did not have much control over any of the writing process, except for writing the book. The past, I don't know, I guess 8 years or so, I've had total control over all of it. And I am a recovering type A. So I did need that control for a long time. I've become a lot more relaxed about it, but it's probably because I do control my future now more than I did when I was traditionally published. That's what essentially what happens is they do take it and you don't get anything back, except if it doesn't work, then they'll give you your rights back after a period of time. But technically, according to the contract, you're not giving up your rights. You're licensing the rights to them. And sometimes they have a finite term on it, like 7 years or something, after which you can renegotiate. But most books don't even earn out. I mean, most books are dead after, 2 years. So it doesn't really matter. So essentially, you are giving them your book. You're selling your book for an advance, except that's not the way it works a lot anymore, because there are so many people that want to get published and only so many publishers. The publishers still, even though publishers have been going through bad times, and even though publishers are they're still making very good profits. We little authors, we are the writer bees, and we are locked in a little desk, and we give our life for the publisher, hopefully to get a good review from Kirkus. I was being a little bit snarky, but it has to do with, where publishing has been and where it is going. And they would prefer that you don't ask questions and that you take your little advance, which when you start out is not great unless you happen to have a power agent, which I thought I did, but I did not have a power agent. So I started out with tiny little advances, and they didn't get much bigger over the few years that I was published. They got a little bit bigger, but not as much. I mean, not enough to live on, certainly. I mean, maybe enough to have a nice hobby, but not to live on. And the deadlines and the editing was good. I had some good editors. And in fact, publishing went through a catharsis of its own. 6 or 7 years ago, when ebooks started to be, and Amazon started to be a big threat, and they laid off a lot of editors, and those editors now are freelancing, and I use them for my own editing, for my own developmental editing. I write crime thrillers, mostly 90%. I also write historical mysteries, and my most recent novel wasn't a mystery at all. It was straight historical fiction. So you can say that I've been all over the crime fiction genre, writing police procedurals, private eye books, amateur sleuths, other parts of the genre, suspense novels, domestic thrillers, political thrillers. And then I've done the same with historical standalone thrillers. But the most recent one was straight historical fiction, and I loved it. It's the first time that I've really, really enjoyed writing. I'm the type of writer that I hate writing because I always feel unequal to the task. I always feel, well, I'm not fooling anybody. They're going to figure out that I'm a total fraud. And this is the book, and this is the chapter, and this is the page that they're going to see. They're going to see right through me. So I am a fraud. But then after it's all written and it's published and I'm holding the book in my hand, I love it. I did this. Oh my God, I birthed this little book. You know, it's a real schizophrenic kind of feeling, you know, from hate to love in a few months. So, but I will tell you that A Bend in the River, which is the one that I wrote that is not a thriller and not a mystery, but it's about the Vietnam War from the perspective of two sisters in Vietnam. I loved writing that. I don't know why. I don't know why. I think once in a great while, I get graced with a book or a subject matter that I know where it's going to go from the very first page. And that was one of two books that I can say that happened. I knew where it was going. I loved where it was going. I went with it. And I think it was my best book. I don't know if the book I'm writing now that is back in my series is going to be nearly as powerful, but we'll see. Procrastination is the tool of every author, particularly when they don't think they're writing very well. I do everything in the world except write. I used to work in a public relations firm, and before that, I worked in broadcast news, and so I still get requests to do videos and write video scripts, and I'd much rather do that. I can knock out a video script in a couple of days. It takes me a year to write a book because the video script isn't personal, Actually, it's probably going to make me more money than the book will too. But the book, writing a book, writing a novel is a challenge. It's a personal challenge. I'm not sure why I was offered this challenge or why I took it. My mother, who died 2 years ago, could tell me that I never turned down a challenge. That's what she would say. But I'm not sure. But I'm in it now. I've been in it since I told you, 1996. And I did want to mention that within every genre of literature or popular fiction or popular, whatever you want to call it, are lots of subgenres. And then there are subgenres within the subgenres these days. And so people who know their subgenre are one step ahead of people who are just starting out and say, well, I'm not quite really sure. I think it's a mystery, or, maybe it's kind of a suspense novel, or maybe it's a thriller, and they're all related, but they're not quite the same thing. So when people are starting out in this business, whether they're writing, mysteries or not, they need to hopefully be readers themselves, which, by the way, is the best way to procrastinate. And you can learn all about the subgenres that you think you're interested in. For example, pardon me, one of the subgenres that has periodic waves of success and is totally attractive to authors is the cozy mystery. I don't know if you know what a cozy mystery is. It is a mystery that is where there's no violence on the page. Yes, someone is murdered and the body is found, but there's no mystery on the page. The protagonist is usually an amateur sleuth who has another career as a cook or a caterer or someone who does sewing or someone who does, I don't know, all these quirky professions. And the titles, if the title is a pun, that will give it away as a cozy mystery. They're kind of cute. They're kind of, easy reading. They're, they don't tax you too much, but they give you, a puzzle to solve. And right now, cozies are going through the roof in terms of popularity. So, and they're also pretty easy to write once you know the structure. I mean, there's a structure to almost every book. And, without going through the hero's journey or going all the way back to Beowulf or something, there is a structure to plot. And once you know it, you are in much better shape than you would be if you didn't. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they first start out, I just read something today. I think it's 81% of 81% of Americans think they're going to write a book while they're still alive. 81%. Well, I sure hope they know what they're going to write. I sure hope they don't think they're going to write the great American novel, because I haven't yet, and I don't want to. I'm just a storyteller. I just like stories. I'm a sucker for a really good story. Give me a good story and I'll just stay locked up in a room until I finish it. So I hope that's what other people have in mind. I think you do need a liberal arts education, and I think you have to have a real grounding in grammar and in language and how to use it precisely. I was very, very lucky that I had an excellent education. I went to a private school in Washington, D.C., National Cathedral School for Girls. Then I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and then I went to NYU Graduate School, where I studied film production, because my dream was that I was going to be a female Ingmar Bergman. I was going to be what was her name that she did the movie where they were stranded on an island? Lena Wertmüller. I was going to be the Lena Wertmüller of the United States. And I was going to make beautiful movies. And I was going to walk off into the sunset with Ingmar Bergman. And we were going to be great pals. And that was my dream. Go figure. A writer needs to be very comfortable using language. Just like a mathematician uses numbers, or a physicist uses formulas, or an engineer uses whatever they use to compute something. A writer needs to be very comfortable in language. If you're not, hire a ghostwriter who is. It's one of those questions that I didn't know the answer to until I published 3 or 4 or 5 books. And I will tell you the story that I tell everyone. I thought that after my father died, he was a very, not narrow-minded, but very down-to-earth, made sure I took typing when I was 15 years old, because I was probably going to be a secretary one day, and he wanted me to make sure I could type. He was a businessman. He had his own ideas about what women should do and be. And after he died, I said, I'm free. I can do whatever I want. And that's when I went back and I started writing, and in 4 months in the basement, and came out with a pile of dirt. But it took me, I always read. I'm a voracious reader. Oh, that's the other thing I think a writer needs to do. A writer, let me start it over again because I want to make sure. In addition to language, I think that a writer needs to read. I think only by reading everything that you can get your hands on, wherever you are, you will get an appreciation for the way other authors do it. You might not like it. I mean, there are a lot of books that I put down now. I mean, I used to have the 50-page rule. I'll give a book 50 pages. That's a waste of 48 pages to me, because I can tell within 2 pages of starting a book whether I'm going to want to finish it or not. I might read the first chapter just to be sure of my opinion, but I usually am. But you need to read. You need to get an idea of the different genres, of the different stories that are being told, so that if and when you want to write, you will have a clearer idea of what's involved. So anyway, now cut, edit, back to, it was about 5, I don't know, it was maybe 6 or 7 years after I had started to publish books that I saw on TV, on the news, a story about O.J. Simpson selling his own memorabilia in Vegas, and they arrested him for that. And that's how they got him into prison for all that time. And I'm watching the news and I'm watching this and I'm going, oh my God, just like that. And I knew why I'd started writing mysteries. The O.J. Simpson trial was on TV in 1995. The O.J. Simpson trial was one of the first trials to be televised. And I was freelancing at the time. I hadn't started writing at all or anything. I was freelancing doing, well, it's one of my reinventions. And I was fascinated because the characters were just so perfect. There was the ambitious prosecutor who was kind of, all caffeined up every day. There was her laid back second chair. There was the surfer dude who was part of OJ, who lived near OJ. There was OJ himself. There was his beautiful wife. There was the waiter that everyone thought his wife and the waiter were having an affair, but they weren't. And there was the avuncular F. Lee Bailey who was there. I mean, who was like Walter Cronkite of the lawyer, of the criminal legal profession. I mean, you couldn't have had a better stable of characters. They came out of casting, whatever you call it. And the other thing that fascinated me about the trial were the forensics. Now, I didn't know forensics from anything, but all of a sudden they're talking about, footprints, shoe prints that they could that police could dig out, and they could figure out what kind of shoe it was and the shoe size. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. And then they're talking about the angle with which the victim was stabbed, and they could tell if he was left-handed or right-handed. Didn't know that. Then there was the blood spatter on the walls and on the floors. They could tell the pressure with which he had been stabbed, and how far the blood spurted out would give them more information. And I'm like, this is like magic. I didn't know the police could do all this stuff. And then they start talking about the bloody glove. And then they start talking about a knock on the door, that knock on an air conditioner that might have been, and then they, and of course there was the DNA, which they were just starting to use back then. And it was just fascinating to me. And I realized then that it was watching the O.J. Simpson trial that made me want to start writing a detective story. And my first book, such that it did have a genre, because I didn't know genres back then, was a police procedural, but I didn't know it was. I mean, it was more about a woman and who had a relationship with a cop. But I had a lot to learn, but that was really the fascination. And once I started and learned, I got into a writers group, a very, very good writers group in Chicago, and I was in it for like 20 years. And they were the ones that really taught me how to write fiction. It took me, okay, just so you know, I didn't write a book and suddenly it was published. The fourth book that I wrote was the first book that got published. Now, why did I write 4 books? I have no idea. I just kept thinking, well, maybe this one will be better. And maybe this one will be better. And the third one actually wasn't bad, but it was the fourth one that did. So the journey was not that easy. You know, you'd think, okay, so it took me 4 books to get published because I needed to learn to write fiction. I knew how to write nonfiction. I knew how to write a script, but I had no idea how to write fiction. And it took me 3 books to learn it in a where I absorbed it. I love suspense. I was a voracious reader, and if the book was suspenseful, like Ken Follett is one of my favorite authors in the whole world, mostly because he's multi-genre too. I mean, he wrote, who knew that the Middle Ages could be so suspenseful? I mean, I galloped through Pillars of the Earth, which is one of his, probably his most popular books. And I studied the Middle Ages in school, but he just made it jump off of the page, and I was entranced. And so anyway, I love suspense. I love to try to match wits and figure out what the twist is going to be. And do I know it? And most of the time back then, I had no clue, and I was always surprised. And I was always staying up too late, and I was always breaking dates so I could stay home and read. And finally, I always thought I put those 2 things together, but it was really OJ that gave me the trigger. So you got to give the devil his due, or I need to give the devil his due. It's solitary, but it doesn't mean that I don't work with people. At every stage of the type of books that I write, I need to do research, and I need my research to be accurate. If it's not accurate, someone's going to figure it out. Someone's going to be reading who does know what they're talking about, and take my book and throw it across the room and say, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. So that means lots of phone calls, lots of emails, lots of tracking people down who may or may not want to be tracked down. In some cases, talking to people who don't want to be acknowledged, who want to stay under the radar. And so I'm always talking to people. I mean, the book that I'm writing now, it has a lot to do with COVID, and I had to learn all about how COVID is distributed. And there were a lot of surprises in there because I thought I knew, and I didn't know things. So lots of research all the time. But it is once you get in front of your computer screen, or I do know people that still write in longhand. And one of my closest friends is a fellow named William Kent Kruger, who is a New York Times bestseller. And a lot of people watching this probably already know of him. He still writes in longhand. Well, he's sort of stopped. He's sort of half and half now. But for his first 15 books, he wrote it in longhand. He thinks it's a really good way to slow your mind down so that you can search for the best word or the best phrase. And he's a beautiful lyrical writer. I have all these thoughts, and so typing is really good, is really the format for me, and cleaning it up later. So yes, writing is not easy. You're going to write your first draft, and hopefully there's a story there. But it's not going to be polished. It's not going to be great. Sometimes it's just going to be, I'm going to stick this in here and I'll figure what to do with it, what I need to do with it later. And then when you're finished and you've celebrated finishing a novel, you put it away for about 3 days, and then you go back and you try to clean it up. Absolutely. I came out with a Masters of Film Production from NYU, and I had a choice. I could starve in a garret someplace trying to write screenplays and wait until someone bought my screenplay, at which point they would find me dead and a skeleton because I couldn't survive. Or I could join a union in New York and work in broadcast news as an assistant film editor. I'm a lot older than I look, and these were the days before tape, and we used film for news. So of course I went that way, and I cut film, or I assisted cutting film for nightly news for all of my vacations, and then I got hired permanently, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because I knew I automatically, when you're cutting video or you're cutting film, you know when to get into a scene and you know when to get out of a scene. And that translates perfectly to a book. You know when to get in and you know when to get out. Or I do. I implicitly know that. So my video editing and producing background was highly useful for writing. I was a writer. I wrote for corporations. I wrote, product film videos and films. I wrote propaganda for for Fortune 500 companies. So that was really useful too. By this time, I had been promoted out of assistant film editing, and I moved back to Washington, D.C. from New York, still at NBC. And I was on what they call the desk. And that was an adrenaline-filled position. When something broke, I was in charge. If it was my shift, I was in charge of deploying the reporter and the news crews to get it covered. I went to work with a knot in the pit of my stomach every day because I hoped that I was going to be doing the job right. My very last job in TV news was the overnight desk at NBC. We had the head of NBC News at the time was in the military. He was a Marine, and he was like, okay, this is my interpretation. You women want to make it in news? Okay, I'll show you. You work from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and let's see how well you do. So I did. For 4 months. I worked the overnight shift, and I hated it. And I got depressed, and it was everything wrong with it. I just could not, I couldn't adapt to it. And then I got laid off. So at that point I had to decide, or actually I had to come to the realization that I probably wasn't going to be the head of NBC News by the time I turned 35. It wasn't long after that I moved to Chicago, which is where I live now. And I've lived here now for over 40 years. And I started working at a very large public relations firm, who they wanted me because of my TV experience, because they wanted me to help train their clients for TV interviews and print interviews. You hear it now. What do they call it? The message, well, the talking points. I mean, nobody even talking points. It used to be called messages. We tried to do it with a little more grace, a little more dignity, but that's what it was talking points. And but I did go to Burson Marsteller, and I was there for 8 years because I needed to prove to myself that I could hold a job for more than a few years, because I had really worked around in TV news, not just NBC. I didn't go into some of the other places that I worked, and one of the places I was fired from. One of the places went out of business. One of the places I was fired from, and then I was laid off. So not a great career. I did hold the job at Burson Marsteller for 8 years. I learned how to train people to be better spokespeople. I wrote speeches. I produced videos. It was a lot of fun. There were a lot of good people there. But after 8 years, I was married and I had a little kid at home, and I traveled a lot in the job, all over the country to train people. And I didn't see my son very much. And so that was pulling at me. So I quit and I went freelance with the tools that Burson Marsteller had told me. And it was during that time, well, I freelanced for about 7 or 8 years, writing scripts, training people how to speak properly when they were in public. And it was during that time that I watched the O.J. Simpson trial. And and reading. I was always reading, always reading. So they all helped me. But there, looking back, there was a commonality to all the jobs that I had, all the reinventions, all the careers. It was all about speaking proper language and creating stories that people would find interesting and compelling. So discipline, which is something that as I get older, I need. I am now in a writers group. Well, I'm in 2 writers groups. I'm in a writers group. We meet online every morning at 7:00 in the morning, from 7 to 9. We say good morning. We mute ourselves. We stop our video, but we're all writing. And for a good hour, hour and a half, I'm writing. And this started about 6 months ago. Before that, I have no idea how I finished my books. I have no idea, because I am so distractible. And particularly with the politics of the last 4 years, I was constantly, checking the New York Times and the Washington Post online and CNN. And I don't know how I wrote those books, but now you need discipline. You need, hopefully, the same time of day, even if it's only an hour, even if it's only a half an hour, you can get stuff done in a half an hour. If you've got a day job, you can still get stuff done in a half an hour. It's better to have an hour, but you go with what you have. So you need the discipline to have the pages, to just write the pages. And they don't have to be good. They just have to be written. You've probably heard of, oh God, now I'm getting who's the woman that wrote Bird by Bird? Annie Lamott. Annie Lamott is a writer's writer. And she has a whole chapter that's called Shitty First Drafts. And that is your objective as a writer. It's to write a shitty first draft, but it has to be written, because only if you have it written can you rewrite it and make it better. Well, there's all sorts of new software now that people can use to write books. I don't use any of it. I use Microsoft Word, and I have used that. But yeah, you should be familiar with a word processing program. And if you really want to be, au courant, you can learn some of the writing software that exists. I just think it's more trouble than it's worth. But that's it. That's all you need, a decent computer. Unless you want to write by longhand, then you need lots of, yellow pads and pens or pencils. I used to travel all the time. Book signings, when a new book would come out, I would do book signings all around the country. There were conferences, they were all around the country, some of them even in Europe or in Hawaii and in other places. So yes, before the pandemic, it started to slow down around 2016, because so much promotion was starting online. And now I would say 95% of my promotion is online. I still go to local signings, and if someone asks me, I do teach. I teach workshops in suspense now. I teach workshops on plot and dialogue and setting. And I sometimes do all-day workshops. So I will go, if someone wants to pay me, I will go. But during the pandemic, I did them all via Zoom. I did a great workshop in Alaska when I was sitting right here. So there you go, Seward in Alaska, who knew? But so now I don't travel very much at all. And I'm pretty happy. Not that I don't. I mean, I'm the kind of person, this was a big deal to get dressed and put on makeup. And, I'm usually running around in sweats or even my bathrobe when it's cold. So it's much harder to get published traditionally these days. and it times 10 to get decent money when you get traditionally published. Believe it or not, advances at what they call the big five, which are the big New York 5 publishers. There may only be 4, who knows these days. I've heard of people getting as little as $3,000 as an advance. And then I've heard of mostly men, because it is still a man's, the men get more money than the women, can get 25. That's sort of a starting advance for a guy who's writing an okay book, which still isn't enough to live on these days, but it's much better than the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, or $6,000 advances that the women are getting. That's why Sisters in Crime, which is an organization I belong to and was president of, is working to get women parity with men. We've been working on it for 30 years. It's gotten a little bit better, but I don't know. I don't ask people what they make, but I just know that they make less than men. Another disadvantage of traditional publishing is that you need an agent. I mean, it can be a disadvantage, and in other ways it can be an advantage, because they really are the new gatekeepers, and they're not going to, but you have to remember, an agent will say, oh, I'm working with you and you're my new partner, and we're going to have, we're going to have a great relationship, a great friendship. And they're not working for you. They're working for the publisher. And if the publisher doesn't like your book, and if another publisher doesn't like your book, which side of the bread is buttered for the agent? What you're doing for the agent, or what the publishers can do for the agent? It's the publishers, because the agent is getting 15% of whatever you get as a writer. So it can go both ways. An agent can be, if an agent is really, really good, she can make, or he can make your book wonderful. It can take it from a B+ to an A. Other agents don't know what they're doing and are just in it to make money. You will not have to put out a lot of money initially to be traditionally published. The editing is on the house. I mean, and typically now, because they don't have editors on staff, they hire the freelance editors that used to be on staff. So they're going to be paying their freelance editors like $2,500 to edit your manuscript, even though you need to submit a polished manuscript. This is where it gets a little bit confusing. If you have an agent, your agent is going to say, I want you to send it to a developmental editor. Now, a developmental editor is probably the most important influence on a book, whether you're self-published or you're traditionally published. I've been self-published for 7 books. I would not publish a book without having a developmental editor. In fact, I just hired a new one today for the book that's coming out in hopefully 5 months. And I just won't do it, because I can't see my own mistakes. And I don't think any writer can really, they're not mistakes as much as they might be places where the plot is incredible, or awkward writing, or boring writing, or stereotyped characters. And you can't see that when you're going through your own manuscript. I don't care, self-editing, that's all the big thing. No. You need a second pair of eyes. You need a second pair of experienced eyes to take a look at your manuscript, and then do what they say, because they're getting paid good money for it, and they're doing it. They're not doing it to hurt you. They're not doing it because they're jealous. They're not doing it because they're failed authors. They're doing it because that's their living, and they know what they're doing. I can safely say that of all the developmental editors I have used, I've probably taken a total of 90% of everything they've told me and put it in the manuscript, because I think they know more than I do, or I hope that but after a while, when the editor says this, she's, yeah, she's absolutely right. You know it in your gut. So if you're traditionally published, they do that. You don't have to pay for it. If you're self-published, you have to pay for it. If you're traditionally published, you don't have to pay for the cover. They'll come up with the cover. You don't really, as a first-time author, you don't have a lot of power at the cover, but they know what they're doing. They usually come up with really good covers. And you might have some input. Well, yeah, I like red rather than blue, whatever. When you are self-published, you do your own cover. And you think you know what you want, but you really need to learn the basics of cover design. And that's why I believe you need a professional cover person. I would always use a cover professional person. And then there's the copy edit. Even if you write a clean manuscript, and people say I write a pretty clean manuscript because of because I know language and I know grammar, you need a copy edit. I need a copy edit. I would never publish a book without a copy edit. Copy editing is totally different than developmental editing. Developmental editing is plot and characters, and is it working, and is it right, and is it exciting, and did you forget that you left this guy sitting in the middle of the desert? And you might want to add a character that does this and that and the other. Copy editing is simply, it's line editing. It's taking awkward words. It's getting the grammar straight. It's getting the spelling straight. It's going to the Chicago style of manual of style and making sure that the way you're expressing yourself is part of the lingo of published works. And I truly believe that everyone needs a copy editor, whether you are traditionally published or self-published. If you're traditionally published, you will get one free. If you're self-published, you're going to have to pay for one. So if anybody's been, like the shows where they add up everything that it's going to cost, it costs to do self-publishing right. And I can give you a figure. It's about 2 years. It's pre-pandemic, because a couple of us sat down and tried to figure out the minimum that you could get away with in self-publishing and still have a professional looking book. And it was $5,000. And that included $1,000 for marketing and promotion, which was just the beginning. What starts when you are self-publishing is a constant stream of promotion if you really want to sell. It's some people, some self-published authors hit things at the luckiest time and soar. And it's like they found a unicorn and they're riding the unicorn to the heavens. But that's about 1%, less than 1% of us. The rest of us are plugging away, putting in money, hoping to get it back in sales, and in designing ads, doing ads, promoting ourselves shamelessly. I mean, they're not shamelessly. You have to have some grace about it, but it can be quite taxing. You do have control. I mean, you have control, and I don't know that I could give up that control anymore and let somebody else. I mean, editing, fine. Let me write my story. You can edit it. I'll probably decide that you know more than me. But cover and market, particularly marketing. I mean, now that I know how to, when I was at Burson Marsteller, I learned how to market. But here was the difference. We were marketing and promoting to thousands of people. For example, let's say we were working for General Electric and they wanted to tell the public how wonderful they were being with electricity and how it was going to save the climate, right? So we would design these programs to reach public opinion. I mean, and these would be designed for thousands of people to see and hear and fall in love with General Electric. Okay. Now I am doing marketing for one person for one book. One person, one book. It's a big difference. You're not going to make a lot of money. Having said that, there are a few who make a ton of money. Lee Child, who is a very successful crime thriller writer. The rumor is he makes $1 million a book. He is probably the only author I know that makes $1 million a book. Most people, if they're lucky, can get $20,000 profit. I mean, profit. Some people say, some self-published authors say they're making $100,000 a year. And I believe them. And I believe that they are, because I'm not. And I know it if I was. But you also have to say, how much are they spending? How much, you know, and you never hear that. You hear how much they're making, but is that profit or is that just revenue? So, you know, I take that with a grain of salt, but, you know, it's all over the place. Traditional publishing, you're probably not going to make a whole lot more than, remember I said, you know, if you're a guy, you may get 25,000, but you have to split 15% with your agent, and there's taxes, and they don't pay it to you all at once. They pay it to you in 3 different spurts. With self-publishing, there's no limit, but most self-published authors don't do the marketing, don't do their homework, don't put in the investment, and their books go nowhere. I mean, if you just want to write a book about your family and you want it up there, you want your family to know that, you know, you're a published author, then go ahead and do it. But the expectations are completely different. If you're really trying to make a go of it as a career, then you're going to be in for a lot of surprises along the way. And hopefully you'll have pocket money, you know, more than pocket money to spend for it. I am finally making a profit now after 26 years in this business, and how many, 17 or 18 books, because they're all out there. And they're not, that's the other good thing about self-publishing. A book does not go out of print. Publisher doesn't take it out of print. It's out there forever. So when somebody discovers me and says, oh, I would love to read her first book, it's there. It's right there. You just have to go to my website. You'll see where it is, and you can get it from any of the retailers, or you can get it from me, or however. So finally, you know, with all those books and all the promotion and advertising I'm doing, I'm making more than I'm investing. Is it enough to live on? Not really. Not in the style I would like to be accustomed to. Anytime you go to a cocktail party and someone finds out you're a published author, someone will come up to you and say, I have got the best idea for a book. How about you write it, and, you know, we'll sell it and we'll make a fortune. It's a book that's never been written. It's really a super story. So that's number one that happens. Most of them, you know, the story, you know, and the right thing to do is to say, I couldn't do that because I might get in trouble with the rights and the intellectual property. And I would suggest that you write it, and then you can keep all the money. Occasionally, editors that think they know more about the market than they do. They're publishers. Publishers are just figuring out what the market is all about and who's reading books these days. And I think self-publishers who are really involved in figuring these things out and are looking and are acting in a professional, business-like manner, which is critical if you're going to have any success, already know who they're writing for. They know who their audience is. And so they'll keep writing for their audience. Well, I think the big five are still just figuring that out. And that's down to, you know, how many copies you're going to sell with you know, a big publisher. I mean, the John Grishams, the Michael Connollys, the Lee Childs, and there are a few women writers who are crime writers who are really, really well known and really good. Lisa Jackson, Lisa Unger. There's the Lisas: Lisa Jackson, Lisa Unger, Lisa Scottolini. There's another Lisa Gardner. They're all wonderful female authors. Karen Slaughter. Karen Slaughter is a fabulous author. Tess Gerritsen is a fabulous author. They're making really good money. They are the exception that proves the rule. I think all of them are probably pulling down. They're all traditionally published. So they don't have to really lift a finger to do any of their marketing. They just have to keep writing their wonderful stories. And I'm sure they're making, you know, $500,000 a book or something like that. So there are success. And then there are authors all the way down. You know, for every Karen Slaughter, there's another author and another author and another author that are not making as much, but making enough, you know, $100,000 or $80,000 starts to be a living. So it's not all, but let me put it this way. I heard a statistic, and this was about 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it was mostly toward traditional publishing of the, if there are 50,000 traditionally published authors, only 2,500 are making a living at it. The others are making less than they could be. So. A good story. If I came up with if I were graced with another really good story, I would just have to write it. You know, it would just get into my soul, you know, would get into my heart, and I'd have to write it. The other thing I really enjoy doing, like I enjoyed editing film, I love editing copy. Not everybody's, my own, because I love to make it better. And I know when I'm just writing something and it's a journeyman sentence, and I know that if I put a little more effort into it, I could be writing a beautiful sentence. Not anything that's going to overwhelm, but it's going to fit perfectly. And it's just going to add, you know, by one adjective or the verb, it's going to add the perfect cap to the paragraph or the sentence. So those are two things. Someone calling me or writing me an email and saying, I just loved your book and I stayed up until 3 a.m. because I had to finish it. So I mean, how can you not like that? So those are about the 3 things. You know, it's changing. Since I've been around for a while, things that used to bother me don't bother me so much. It used to bother me that people whom I thought were not very good writers had phenomenal success with a few books and were making 5 times as much money as me. That used to really bother me. I was jealous, and I was competitive, but that doesn't bother me anymore, because everybody's different. Well, I'm just more mature now. What else? Boredom. Sometimes I know that my story's not going someplace and I'm very bored with it. And I know that I have to start over with a brand new story. And that really tears me up because I've spent already, you know, a few months writing it and it's just not working. That's not good. And bad reviews. I do not like bad reviews. You know, part of me wants to write them back and say, you got it all wrong, you fool. But you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to say a word about a bad review. Well, it's not that I didn't know these things. I just wish that I had been more, kept my mouth shut a little bit more and not felt compelled to tell someone how I really thought about the situation at hand. Probably would have saved me a couple of jobs, a couple of books, maybe a couple of publishers. I don't know. I wish that, you know, I hadn't been quite as vocal keeping one's mouth. There is something to be said for smiling and not saying anything. I remember when I had the contract for my first book, and my husband, who was an intellectual property lawyer, said, this contract is all wrong. It doesn't protect you at all. It's everything in here is to the publisher's advantage and not for yours. And he starts going down all the clauses in the contract. And I'm like, Mark, I don't care. I just want to sign it. I want to sign it. I want to be published. And now, looking back, I wish that I had at least listened to what he said or what he wanted to tell me, because then in future contracts, I might have had a little bit more power or a little bit more knowledge to say, no, I'm not going to go with that clause, but let's see if we can compromise someplace. But I didn't even listen to him, because he said, you just want me to roll over and let you sign the contract. I said, yep, that's what I want. And so I could have learned from him, probably. Married to the book. I was obnoxious for the first 10 years I was writing. I mean, everything revolved around me and writing and the book and where I was going and how I was doing and whether I was climbing the sales charts or, devastatingly low sales. And, I didn't have a life. It was all around the books and the book people and the publishers and the agents and maturity, I guess, does give one some balance. And I would say, yeah, I pretty much have, I'm very happy. I mean, I do what I write, but I don't write exclusively. I write for a couple hours a day and that's it. Well, that's not it. There is, let me be honest, there is always marketing and promotion to do. And not on the book that you're writing, on all of I've got 18 books and 25 short stories. There is always something I could be doing to market my books. And I do quite a bit of marketing and promotion online. So the mornings are writing and the afternoon is business, generally. But it's a full-time job between those two things. It is a full-time job, but it's not all of my life. I'll take time out and go travel. I love to travel, went to Vietnam to do research for the book that I wrote, A Bend in the River, went other places to do research, probably going to go to the Amalfi Coast when it gets next summer, maybe next fall. So, and my friend wants me to go to Russia with her. Writers love to talk about themselves, as you've noticed. And, go to the library, ask your librarian, are there any local writers around that you like that, that are full-time writers, let's say, get your qualifications there. And the research librarians probably will know, because they're really smart devils. And, call them up, email them, say, would you mind, can I take you out for a cup of coffee? I'd really like to talk to you about what it's all about, what it's like to write. And there are many, many things you can write, you can find online, articles that writers have written about what the life is like. And, but I would say, get it from the horse's mouth and ask them, write down the list of questions that you've got and interview them. It'll be fun for you. Find out a little bit about the industry and the issues of that particular industry, or sometimes the industries of the company that you want to work for or that you have an interview with before you go to the interview. Do a little bit of homework yourself so that you can ask intelligent questions of the person who's interviewing you. They'll be impressed that you know enough and that you've taken the time to learn a little bit about them. just as they're trying to know a little bit about you.